All right, Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO here at Project Purple. I'm the Project Purple Sports Podcast here, and I have the pleasure. This is really exciting. First of all, I get a lot of heat. We got some heat this year when we would stream Notre Dame Prep games saying that I was biased. Well, I don't care because I am biased. I am an alum of Notre Dame Prep and a very proud alum, but I am excited to have head boys basketball coach, Coach K, as he's called, here with us on the Project Purple Sports Podcast. Welcome to the Project Purple Sports Podcast, Coach K.
Yeah, thanks, Dino. Appreciate it very much. Special to be here.
Well, I know we were talking a little bit before I hit record. I'm excited. Um, you've had this amazing journey, and I don't think a lot of people know this. Like I had to do some research, and there was a couple videos out there. There was one video and a couple articles that go really way back. Probably to like 2008, 2006. For our audience listening, and I don't think enough people know your backstory, which is really, really impressive. I'd love to hear it from you firsthand. And we were talking a little bit about it. Like, you didn't start as a basketball coach, as some people take that track, whether they're an educator. You have education in the family business, but that wasn't the track that you started on.
Yeah, it's been a unique journey. It really has. It's a journey of it's a great, it's a great life lesson, certainly for me, but for others too, in the sense that, I pursued I found multiple passions, right? And so I started my career. I went to college, played a couple of years of basketball in college, and then was always a student of the game, loved it very much. It was a family activity for us. My dad played a couple of years in college, and my brother played, and so basketball was always in a passion for us. But I went professionally after college. I went to Wall Street, and I worked at a firm of some renown called Cantor Fitzgerald, and then went to Neuberger Berman, and then got involved in the hedge fund business. And I got involved working for Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets, and so worked for him for 4 or 5 years, and then started a place with some colleagues and partners called Satellite Asset Management. We had that for 8 years, and it was one of the larger firms around of its kind, and had a great deal of success. And I was always coaching on the side and working with, young people, and loved working with young people. My family business, as you described it, was an education. My dad was a high school principal and then superintendent of schools for Brooklyn and Staten Island in New York. My stepmom was a high school principal. My mom was a longtime teacher. Aunts and uncles were principals and teachers. And so it was working with kids was always a passion of mine. I worked at camps and things like that every summer. And so all of those things were really special for me. And at the end of '06, I just decided, interestingly, I was coaching the son of one of my partners, and he said, wow, I never see you like this, and I thought about it, and I loved what I did. I was never, people talk about burnout. I never got burned out. I was all in my career, but I decided that, that what I was incrementally going to make wasn't worth what I was giving up to make it. And what I was giving up was this opportunity to deep dive into, frankly, teaching, coaching, and philanthropic work. And that's really what my drivers were. And so at the end of '06, I left, and I reached out to Westhill High School, which was a local high school. My family and I were in Stamford, and at that point, I was married and had two kids at the time. And I'm sorry, I had all three of my kids at that time, and reached out to the coach of Westhill, and I said, look, I'd love to join your staff. And it was obviously, he was really forthcoming and said that's great, and asked for what I've been doing, and was confused by why I was wanting to do this. But I coached the freshman team there, and we had a great run for a couple of years there. And then I got the opportunity to go to St. Luke's, and I went to work at St. Luke's for 4 seasons, and we were runner up in New England, and had a really good run there, and then revamped after my first year because the seniors graduated, and we rebuilt, St. Luke's basketball in a lot of ways. And then my daughter's longtime head coach my daughter was a decent player, but she had her longtime head coach at Westhill on the girls' side was leaving. He got an opportunity, and so I was asked to take that over. So I took that over for 2 years. And then Mike Walsh reached out and said he wanted to handpick his successor at Trinity Catholic, and so went over there and was his associate head coach, and then took over the program there. And then when Trinity closed, had the good fortune to go up to Notre Dame, and have been there 5 years, and it's been an amazing marriage, really. So
Wow, that's pretty wild. I mean, like, they say is like one door closes, another opens, and sometimes you don't see it right away, right? But you think you walk away from a hugely successful career in financial services. I almost got so I used to be in that business on the wholesale insurance annuity side. And when you said Newberger Berman, I was like, oh my God, I almost got flashes of like 2000
yeah,
and 2002, 2003, like going
yeah,
out with Newberger Berman and like Janice and all the funds like that,
yeah,
Invesco, like it's so crazy. Um, but in this time too, you also did something really cool, which is with Peace, Stanford Peace Youth Foundation. So
yeah.
talk a little bit about that, how that got started and where you guys are today, even with that.
Yeah, so I started, as I said, I started coaching at Westhill on the freshman side and assisting on the varsity side in 06, 07. And frankly, along with somebody who had also joined the staff at that time, a dear friend and longtime partner now, Lenwood Lotta, and he was coaching on the JV side. And we looked at Westhill, and we said some of the most talented players in this program are struggling to be eligible, and all of the focus is on keeping them eligible as opposed to making them excellent. And we recognized that education was going to be the pathway, that even those that are the fortunate ones and go on to college and play professionally, they still need an educational foundation in order to have success. And so took matters into my own hands, and I said, all right, we're going to start this program with one team of 9 and 10-year-old boys locally. And the essence of it is going to be that basketball is a privilege, and that your job as a young person is to do your best in school, do your chores at home, be a good citizen. And the reward for doing those things was that you were going to get invested in on the basketball side. And we were going to flip on its head what tends to be or too often is the model, which is that sports, education is something you tolerate because you want to play sports. We wanted to flip that on its head a little bit. And so we had, at that time, one team of 9 and 10-year-old boys. They all went on, or many of them, most of them went on to be very successful, unique relationships built because they stayed with us all through graduation from high school, through college. Probably the best of all of them, I got who I could simply say that it wasn't clear cut that he was going to be a success in life. I got a text from him the other day just saying, look, just wanted to reach out. I haven't spoken to you in a little bit. He said, I think every day about what could have been if I didn't come into Peace, and the other part of that. And so we grew that program um, at its largest. We had 18 different teams, and they were travel teams. I hesitate to call it AAU, even though we were playing AAU basketball, but it was a youth program that happened to play AAU basketball. It wasn't an AAU program per se. And we also have an academic tutoring arm, which focuses on lower income kids. We have a peer tutoring approach where we have still today about 175 kids being tutored twice a week in math and science. They're lower income kids that pay $10 an hour for tutoring. And we get juniors, seniors, and college kids that tutor them. And it's this, really interesting dynamic that's created where they get tutoring, and the results have been, off the charts in terms of the impact that it's had over the years, the academic tutoring arm. And so that's what Stamford Peace has been about. It's still operational, although, I've effectively gifted the basketball side of it to the Stamford JCC so that they can run that, and we run the academic program here in-house. And I'll just cut over for one more second. And part of what was the impetus for starting Stamford Peace was the fact that I've been chairman now for chairman probably for 9 years, but on the board for 20 years, 25 years almost, of an organization called Peace Players International, which uses the game of basketball to bring together kids from conflict regions around the world. So we operate full-time in the Middle East, in South Africa, in Northern Ireland, Cyprus, number of cities in the United States, where we're bringing kids together across historic divides through the game of basketball. And so I reasoned, and that's why I took the name Stamford Peace. I reasoned that if we can do this between Arabs and Jews in the Middle East, then and Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, then we could use basketball as a hook to get better outcomes for local student athletes.
So awesome. I mean, they always say like sports brings people together, right? Regardless, to your point, like regardless of what your political beliefs may be or your religious beliefs, sports does have this really calming effect to bring people together. I think, 9/11, we saw that, right? Like, we can look back for those that remember or that were here. Some people were born after 9/11, but that whole moment of baseball and unity, right? Of the whole country coming
Yep.
together after that event. And, it's just so awesome to hear, Coach K, because, again, I love basketball and to know that you're doing these things. And I think the bigger, another big thing here too with the education piece, and this was one of my questions we're going to talk about, and maybe this is a good segue into it. It's so important for kids in high school to understand like not all of them are going to play at that next level, and especially now what's happening where you have the transfer portal. I was just with some student athletes yesterday. I was in Boston who played at Boston College for soccer, different sport but still Division 1 at a big school. And one player went to Bucknell, and then eventually she had 2 years of eligibility left, so she was able to get on to BC. But like these, we're hearing now like these college coaches aren't even looking at high school kids anymore because, especially at that major level. And then now if you trickle that down, like I know that there's a team that has the longest, well, there's a couple teams now in this Division 3 finals that I have some hooks into. And like even them, they've got D1 kids that just have kind of gone down, from the ones because they weren't playing, wanted a better academic school. And now, they're playing at a super high level, but now what happens to the kid in high school, right? And how important is that education piece, right? Because sports isn't everything, and they may not get that opportunity to play at that next level, but that academic and those skills that they're learning from the academics are that much more critical now, I feel, with the way
Yeah,
that the landscape of college sports has become.
100%, 100%. You know, I say often that those with the least, I'll just say those with the least are encouraged to do the most gambling. They're encouraged to gamble on sports being the outlet. They're encouraged to gamble on entertainment being the outlet. They're encouraged to now increasingly they're encouraged to gamble on sports being the outlet, or criminal activity. They're encouraged to do gambling. Gamblers lose, investors win. And
Right.
the best investment you can make is in your education. That's the surest bet you have. And so that's not to dismiss the goal of playing a sport that you love and have a passion for at the highest level you can. But it has to be get to the highest level of academic institution you can get to using sports as the vehicle, because there are no sure things. Guys get hurt, guys, don't mesh with the coach or the style of play. There are a lot of things that go into it. And I talk oftenly and I say, look, I talk often that, and I say, if you're talking about whether you played Division 1, 2, or 3 when you're 30 or 35 years old, something's not gone right,
Yeah.
because no one really cares. And if
No.
that's what you're touting, that you don't have enough other things to tout that have gone
Right.
right in your life. And so, you know, to kids, I just say, don't worry so much about the level of play. There are good players at every level. And if you're good enough, you look at oh, I just went blank on the guy's name. He plays for the Miami Heat. Shooter,
Oh, Duncan Robinson. Yeah.
Duncan Robinson he played Division 3 basketball, and he was good enough where he ended up having a great career at Michigan and is now in the pros.
Yeah.
There's a
Makes a
player
lot of
playing
money.
in Israel. This player playing in Israel who's been the best player on Maccabi Tel Aviv for many, many years, who played at Staples High School,
Yeah.
then at University of Rochester, and
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
having a great pro career. And so the reality is that talent gets found. But if you stick to the right things and you focus on the right things, then you'll have the opportunity that you probably deserve.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Let's talk about this season because this was our first year with you guys. I know last year you guys had a great season as well. You lost some players to graduation that are now playing at that next level. And then you also lost a player to just another school, Parrish, being he went to Capital Prep. But how was it coming into the season? Like trying to, and you had a lot of couple of new players come in, and then you also had a good nucleus of players coming back. So what
Yeah.
was kind of the approach in the beginning of the season?
Yeah, look, we've got committed guys, so it starts there. I think certainly 4 or 5 years in, um, the culture is one of connectedness. And it sounds hokey, but that's really the what we focus on first is be connected to one another, play connected basketball. And so, coming into this year was interesting. As you said, we had to mesh a lot of kids, younger talent, that guys that had never been tested on the varsity stage. And at the same time, we lost Nate Charlot, who was an amazing player for us, an all-state player for us, and he was in a lot of ways the heart and soul of our team. And then Parish Edmond, not Capital Prep, he went to Putnam
Oh,
Science.
Putnam Science. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
where
Sorry.
where it's funny, like, and I say this, respecting him so much. You know, uh, he didn't just go to another school. He went to a school that won the national championship,
Yeah,
right? The
true.
national prep championship. And
Yeah.
so, he wanted to test his abilities at that level and played really high level AAU and then played really and then they wanted him to come there, and so he decided to go, and I'm still very, very close with him. In fact, I'm coaching him in the
I
schoolboy
saw
class
that.
on
Yeah.
Saturday, which is going to be awesome. And so I've been in the gym with him the past couple of days, and I love the kid. And so, but losing Nate and losing Parrish is a lot for anybody to lose. We did have two starters coming back. We also lost Sam Konaritsky, who
Right.
is in Europe, back in Europe now. And so, but we had Cam Salters, also an all-state player, and really talented, and just a coach's dream, the hardest worker in the gym every single day. And then Josh Charlotte, who started every day, every game of his freshman year, and is as dynamic a point guard as is around. I mean, and I mean that at the highest levels. And so we had those two, which provides a really strong nucleus of captains. Um, and then we had guys that, because of the experience last year, who didn't get as much playing time as they would have otherwise wanted, worked their tail off in the offseason. So Nasir Dunlap worked his tail off in the offseason and was the most improved player, led us in a number of games, was the most outstanding player in the in the SWC championship game, but his improvement year over year was dramatic from his sophomore to his junior year. And so he was a captain also. So those three provided great leadership. And then we had a number of sophomores, Jace Greaves and Jace Greaves and Kieran Blake, who Jace had come over from Stepanak, but hadn't played varsity. And, his impact on the court was huge. His intensity, the way he played, the way he bought in, the no job too big or too small. I'm gonna guard, the best guard the other team has, that kind of mentality. And then Nas playing above his weight class a little bit and growing, Kieran getting big minutes, for us and getting, as a guard, coming in, getting big rebounds for us. Those guys were huge in the development. And then we had seniors that were, and seniors and juniors that were, unsung heroes because they made our practices harder. And a kid like Richie Tuazoli, who I am convinced he would have started for us, but the last two seasons he had hurt his knee. And so he had been out 2 consecutive seasons, but was really gifted and gave us a big lift when he'd come in the games. And so the culture was so strong. And when you have a strong culture, you can teach because you've got, teaching is one part of it, learning is the other. And you need guys that want to learn and want to be coached. And our team did. And so it was one of my favorite seasons of all time, not just because we played well and did well, but because this team was really, it's hard to have leadership like Cam and Josh and Nas and not love it.
Yeah, we started, I think, I forget what the first game was, but I had seen you guys at the Fairfield Prep tournament against Ludlow, and I was like, okay. And then as the season progressed, you guys started to get really, as I say, like dialed in. Like the defense, I'm a defense first guy. I wasn't very much of an offensive player, so I was always a defensive stopper. But I just think the defense and you mentioned the guy like Cam was I mean he's a hell of an offensive player, and I'm excited for him because he can totally play at the next level. Just where he goes, will be, I guess, the bigger question. But he is just like he gives you like 150%. That's from my perspective,
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
sidelines. And he's just like you said, like he's just the guy he's like a coach's dream, right? Because he gives you that 150%. But I remember the St. Bernard game, which was a big game, and you guys went down. You looked a little funky in the first half, but and going in what was like a 2-minute run where you guys demolished that 22-point lead.
yeah,
And granted, they hit the shot at the buzzer, whatever. That's just pure luck. And they're a really good team, but take nothing away from them. But Cam, clapping and getting the kids going and fired up, and it's just something that was just really, really special to see. And we saw that throughout the season. I feel like whenever even in that SWC, there were a couple games early at home where, kind of teams kind of hung around a little bit in that first half, but then it was Cam with that defensive intensity. And the other thing that was really wild, and just to talk about Cam here for a second, he's like the best rebounder on the team, in my opinion.
yeah,
Like he'd have nights where he'd have 10, 12 rebounds, and you're like, oh my God. Like, you think of him from the offensive side, but like just defensively and offensive rebounds. It's just like he's just a great all-around player. So it'll be exciting. We didn't mention this before. So we're doing the All-Star game up at Clinton. So we'll
oh
have
wow,
yeah, we'll
good,
be
good.
up there. We won't be at the Schoolboy Classic on Saturday, which looks like a great event, but we'll be at the All-Star game in Clinton, streaming that. So I'm excited to see Cam play one more time,
Yeah,
because, and the other piece too, and this is top to bottom, Coach K, that I will say from our perspective of being involved this year, the kids all looked happy
yeah,
and like really joyous. And Zach on our team, I know he went down and did like the video in the beginning of the lineup, and he had some interaction with Cam, which is just awesome. And then, you know, I, talk a little bit about your super sophomore, which you mentioned. I mean, you've got a couple super sophomores, honestly, but Charlotte, Josh,
Yeah.
that kid has the smile that, ear to ear before the game and even during the game and through warm-ups. St. Bernard, he came over we were on that press row and he came over and he was talking to us. Just the kid has just this joy of playing, basketball and just loves it. The SWC championship when he got the dunk at the end. I know it was after the buzzer, but that moment was just so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's just awesome to see throughout the team just the joy and the love that they have for playing the game.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say it because, um, I respond two ways. One is that it's interesting the progression of the season. We opened up the season in Florida. We
Right.
played we played 3 games in Florida, and um, we struggled. We competed with teams that were, top 25 in the country, and but we weren't there yet. We weren't ready yet. Our temperament, our body language, other things, we weren't there yet. We were playing against teams that had played 6 games already, and we had played our first game, and so we lost to St. Thomas Aquinas and then Waxahachie from Texas, and I think those were great bonding experiences for our kids. Um, we do rely on our defense, right? And so our defense initiates our offense a lot of times. And but in order to do that, we play a lot of different defenses. And so it requires, it's a learned thing to be able to switch defenses, to be able to lock in so much, to know, all right, we're going from this defense to that defense. We're going, we play 3 different presses. We do a lot of different things to take people, make people, take them off stride. And so that takes over the course of the season, historically, at least in my career, we've been able to peak closer going to the end of the season because all of a sudden it becomes pretty well honed. Um, but you need guys that carry it out, right? You need guys that are willing to lock in that way. Josh Charlotte is as joyful a person and player as you can come across, and what people don't realize, they know he's really skilled. They know he's a great personality. They don't realize just how much he understands about the game of basketball. He is, there's this cliche coach on the court or an extension of the coach. The point guard's an extension of the coach. He'll come over to me and say, look, I think we need to do this. I mean, that's how, and for a sophomore to be doing that, it takes a lot of confidence. And I think he has an enormous amount of self-confidence, but it also takes actual know-how. The other part is that I think it might have been the Stamford High game or maybe I'm sorry, it was the game after. It was the Holy Cross game. In the locker room beforehand, we went through our normal chat. And then it's funny you mentioned joy because I said to the guys, I said, look, we want this to continue, right? We want this to continue. But the one thing beyond X's and O's, I'm going to say is don't let anything steal our joy. Don't let anything steal our joy. Like we love this game. We love each other. Don't let anything steal our joy. I don't care if they go on a run, if we turn the ball over, right? I'll be yelling at you. You'll be yelling at each other, but don't let anything steal our joy. And I think that's the way we played all year with a lot of joy. And that's a credit to not just the 2 guys you mentioned, but we had a football player who had never played basketball, but for 4 years has been telling me, Coach, I'm coming out one time. I'm coming out
Tristan
one time.
Jones.
Tristan Jones.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to come out. I'm going to try out. And I didn't realize that when he said that, I assumed he was a football player that had played a lot of basketball, but just didn't play it in high school. But he was a football player that didn't play a lot of basketball. And he was as much a heart and soul of our team as anybody. He would talk to guys when they were, not in their right frame of mind. And I mean, there were times he was a coach's dream because I'd say to him, we'd be up by a lot of points, and I'd say, Trist, you ready to go in? And he'd say, no, I'll go in at 2 minutes. And he would literally, he'd say, nah, it's 4 minutes left. I'm not going in now. I'll go in at 2 minutes. and and yet he speaks about how this was one of the most fun seasons he's ever had in anything, and so that's the kind of team it was.
It's so awesome. It's so awesome to see. And again, from the games that we saw, now that all makes sense because when he would get in, it was like the whole crowd. Like there were some games, they're calling for him, and then the energy though, like he's a big energy guy, right?
Yeah,
Like he
huge.
super athletic. Like that's what I noticed at first. I was like, wow, this kid's like really athletic, but super energy, which is just awesome to see. And the one thing I'll just say about Josh, and we were fortunate. We've done a lot of basketball. We've done a lot in the NVL. We did some in the FCAC. Um, and I saw early on, and we did some of our homework, like who you had coming back. I think Josh is the best point guard in the entire state of Connecticut,
Yeah,
as a sophomore. And no disrespect to some out there. And when I say point guard, I mean there's some really good shooting guards in the state, and there's a couple that we saw, but in terms of point guard, who can facilitate the offense, to your point, come over and say, hey, coach, like we got to mix this up, is an absolute like menace on defense. Like he averaged, I don't know how many steals he averaged, but there were a couple games where I think he almost had a triple double in one of the SWC games because of his steals.
yeah,
And then his scoring ability, and it's kind of interesting you said as the season went on, like he really took control of some of those big games
yeah,
late in the season for you, as not only just from the facility standpoint and also defensive standpoint, but then also from scoring. And it was kind of wild to see that progression again from an outsider. I knew you had like this two-headed beast. Then we started to see like the three-headed beast with Nasir and the SWC, and then Logan White, another player, and Jameer. Like you almost had like a five-headed beast. Like who was really going to be that third and fourth player to step up? But I thought throughout the season, as the season went on, like Josh, hands down, best point guard we've seen in the state of Connecticut. And it's going to be really fun the next 2 years, is all I'm going to say, because
yeah.
you got him back for two more.
Yeah, no, look, the sign of a great point guard in my mind is two things. Can you speed him up, right? Can you speed him up? And then how does he mix his facilitation with his calling his own number, right? And looking at assist to turnover ratio usually is a good indication of that.
Yeah.
I I I don't know this statistically, but I doubt that anybody had. Josh had a 3.5 to 1 assist, nearly a 4 to 1 assist to turnover ratio this year. That is unheard of,
Yeah.
right? Coaches recruit at the college level. They want point guards who have a 2 or 3 to 1,
Yeah.
and he's nearly a 4 to 1, assist to turnover ratio. But the hardest thing for an eighth grader to do going into high school, right? Especially the most talented eighth graders, they're used to having the ball in their hand. They're the guy, they can score as many points as they want. And then you go and play point guard. It's really hard to figure out, well, what's a good shot? What's not a good shot? When do I facilitate? When do I call my own number? And that's been a learning thing for Josh. He has learned that. And so he sacrifices himself sometimes for the better of the team. But when we need a bucket, he's also without fear in terms of going to get a bucket himself. And so that's going to be a continued work in progress, but it's something that he does exceptionally well. To your point about him being the best point guard, obviously I didn't see all the point guards, so I can't say that. But what I can tell you is I took him to Pangos is one of the big
Yeah.
national camps. And so I took him to the East Coast Pangos freshman sophomore camp and this fall. He got the most outstanding player at the camp. And I was talking to a number of guys who were on the McDonald's All-American Selection Committee. And I was talking to them about Josh, and they were, we were just talking about him, and they said, we've been to all the camps, all the regions, is the best point guard we've seen. He is, he said, normally you get point guards at this level and in an experience like this that you could see they're really skilled and they just call their own number. He just seems to know when to score and when to pass. And as you said, his defense, he doesn't care size. He'll guard the biggest player. during key moments of the game against Notre Dame West Haven, he came over to me and he said, I want to guard Abdul Toure. He said, I want him, and that's not, Abdul is the best player in the state for sure. So that's not a disrespect of him, but it
No.
really is a comment on how much Josh believes in his ability and how much he's willing to dig in. He does not know quit.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I can't wait to see him develop over the next 2 years. I want to shift gears here and just talk quickly. I know you talked about playing out of state, so this is like partly into that. Here in the state, and we've heard this a lot, I think, over the last like year. You've got schools of choice, which are the parochial schools. I also throw in the charter schools because, like we've seen WCA a lot in the Naugatuck Valley. They can pull from all over, right? Like, and they can get kids. Platt's another one up in Meriden. So you have all those schools. SMSA is another one that I've seen. Last year we saw them in the state tournament because we were following Seymour. But again, they're pulling from all these areas. And then you have the public schools. So there's been this debate. So twofold, do you think there's a better system maybe with like the league? Well, I don't know if you could get away from the league, but there's been like I've talked to a couple schools and ADs and coaches and saying like I know it's hard because Connecticut doesn't have for every single sport, I think, the bandwidth to put all the schools of choice into one big league. Maybe they do. But what do you think of that idea? Like, in partly in terms of like you're going out of state to play some of these top teams. So is maybe the solution like you play your league, but you got to go out of state to play some of these top tier teams that potentially, could beat you, you could compete with them. Or is there a better solution in state with maybe taking all those schools of choice and like making them play against each other throughout the season and then into the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those loaded questions. And so I I'm going to try to be politically correct, right? And yet answer the question. Um, Sometimes that something's not perfect, but you're not really sure how to fix it. And
Yeah,
so I've talked to other coaches about, do we create a Catholic school league?
yeah,
Right? We create a Catholic school league. It's not a secret to look at the top 10 teams in the state, and 7 of them typically are either Catholic schools or private schools of some kind, right?
right.
And admittedly, we have an advantage, right? We have an advantage because we're not stuck with, stuck. We're not relegated to a certain town structure. So kids, and especially the success we've had, and I assume the same thing at Notre Dame West Haven, and I assume the same thing at other, schools of choice. Success we have, we don't have to recruit a lot of kids. They recruit us in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
They come and they reach out and they say, we really want to come here. We love, the atmosphere and what's been built and all that stuff. So we honestly, I haven't been to a youth game in too long to even admit. Like, it's not like I'm going out there and saying I want this kid, I want that kid, and cherry picking kids. And I'm sure the same thing for other schools. But we have an opportunity that the public schools don't have. And there are some public schools that do a remarkable job, and usually it's a function of one of two things: either lightning strikes and they have a class that just happens to be off the charts in a given year, or they do a phenomenal job at the youth level of building culture with the younger groups that grow up together. We don't have that. So we don't have. If you look at and they happen to be well coached programs, and so Ridgefield, I have great admiration for Ridgefield. Staples, I have great admiration for Staples. I think they're both extremely well coached and are able to grow these groups from a younger age. And so that's different. I won't say easier or harder, but I will say it's different than having kids come to Notre Dame as freshmen that don't know each other, right? And
yeah.
have never played together, and having to mesh that, build a relationship as well as basketball camaraderie. right? And so the challenges are different. But I've said maybe a Catholic school league, but I think the challenge is, well, for basketball that works. For other sports, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And can we do it just for basketball, or will leagues say, wait a second, you don't do us any favors in the other sports? And so, doing it just for basketball, why are we letting you out for that when basketball is what, helps build the conference? The other thing that's imbalanced is there are some conferences that are a little more competitive and some that are a little less competitive. There are some that have more teams and some that have less teams. So we're blessed. We get 7 non-league games, and
Yeah.
we try to play those non-league games. Every year we play, you know, historically it's been a team from Jersey and a team from New York City. This year, because we played 3 games in Florida, we played 3 games in Florida. We played the Fairfield tournament. We played St. Bernard, and we played uh, St. Joe's, St. Joe's. And so we try to make it as competitive a non-league schedule as we can. And then we have a number of games within our league that are actually competitive, and the schools in which we have competitive games, they vary from time to time, but Colby's always part of it, and
Yeah.
Immaculate and Bunnell and Stratford, and there are a lot of teams that are, and New Fairfield was really good, and Weston's really good and well coached, and so there are teams, but it's not every year that every team is going to be
Right.
good in the public school system. In terms of the state tournament, look, what I would say is, and I have been cautioned, and for good reason. For good reason, because they are absolutely right. I'm not sitting, in the seats of the people that are making the tournament seedings and things like that. And so I can only speak from a perspective of a coach that's part of it. And I would
Yeah.
say that, yeah, I think that we could probably do it the way it's done in college basketball, where you
Yeah.
take you have people that have seen enough of the schools around, and now with live streaming, you can watch multiple games, and you could say at the end of the year, the end of the regular season, here's the top, 32 teams, and these 32 teams are going Division 1. And, as opposed to looking at, I think Westhill got buried with it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Bristol Central got buried with it a couple of years ago, where Donovan Clean graduates, and you're looking at his senior year to determine where you're going to seed this
Yeah.
team the next year. That's problematic, because you get into a buzzsaw then, where you're forced into Division 1, and it doesn't really work. Just last thing I'll say about us is, we my first year was COVID, so our season ended. We only played 14 games. We went 13-1. We won the SWC championship, and that was it. We didn't have a state tournament. The next year, we were put in, because they look back, I think 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
we were put in Division 3. And we chose, and I said to our players, I said, look, on one hand, I'll leave it up to you. On the other, and I know we could have real success at Division 3 level. On the other hand, my attitude is always going to be, we have an advantage. Let's play the best. And so I want us to move up to Division 1. And to a man, our players said, let's move up to Division 1. So we finished Division 3. We lost in the quarters to a great Notre Dame West Haven team.
Yeah.
Next year, they put us in Division 2. And so we moved up again. And then finally now, I think last year we were in Division 2 again, and we moved it up to Division 1 again. And so this is the first year, actually, I think first year that we were actually put from the beginning in Division 1, because now we're at the point where you look back 3 years and it worked to be in Division 1. That system just seems like, now it may be the best system that they can come up
Yeah.
with because of a lot of other concerns, but just from a pure basketball standpoint, it's probably not the best way to do it.
Yeah. I guess my 2 cents here, I think there's too many divisions. And I personally feel so I think 10 wins is get you in, not 8. I think 8 wins is too small. And I get it. They want to spread it around. I think you go to three divisions. I'm a purist, so you go to like large, medium, and small, and you allow teams maybe in that large division, if they're a school of choice or if they've had success to move up. But I think you need to factor in because like I went and saw Manchester play, like they're all seniors. So now does Manchester move up to class one, but they lost all their starting five? Like that's not necessarily fair to them, right? Bunnell stayed in three. Should they have been in two? Like there's these arguments, but like, so like I think to your point though, you said something really impactful. I think like with all the technology that we have, and I think that would be really cool to do like a March Madness thing. Like, okay, like at the end of the season, like when you get through the regular season, postseason really doesn't come into play, but like can you subjectively look at these teams? Like I know there, and I won't name the team. There was a team that was like really ranked really high. It was Division Four. They had one win and they won 14 games. They had one win against a winning team. To me, that's not like really I mean, that's not a really great schedule when you look back, and they were high seeded and they ended up losing in that first round. So like, there I think there's some again with the technology and with everything that's going on, there's probably a better way of doing it to maybe levelize it a little bit and also reward teams that have seniors that are playing really well and also take that into account to your point, like Bristol Central having that buzzsaw, next year, there are now you're in D1 because you had such a great team the year
Right.
before.
Oh,
Like,
exactly.
bring
Exactly.
them down or like make it more levelized, I feel, for everybody.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think where it comes together with the schools of choice discussion is I think, and I empathize. I think that there are probably some people that say, well, we want all of our student athletes, especially our public school student athletes, to have the opportunity to compete for at Mohegan. It's a wonderful occasion
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so, to participate in an experience like that. And so I think that, and I believe in that. I think that's terrific. I think that at the same time, you could have a tournament where you have the top 32 and you rank it at the end of the year. And will there be some bruised feelings? Yeah, there'll be some bruised feelings. Some people, there's always a case where, you can make the argument teams 28 through 36 are
Yeah.
all at the same level, but that's just the way it is. And then you take the other divisions and, whatever, if it's two more divisions, if it's three more divisions,
Yeah.
and you do that based upon school size. And so, will that put some public schools against some, private schools? Yeah, but that's the way it is. And this is something that's deeply personal to me, the argument that people lament about the school of choice experience. Nobody complains about the fact that a a Greenwich High School, a Darien High School, a New Canaan High School are juggernauts in football,
Yeah.
both
And
because they do,
lacrosse.
in lacrosse where they dominate. And look, it's not by coincidence. I mean, obviously they're really well coached and they have great youth programs and stuff like that. But those are as much schools of choice in the
Correct.
realm of football as we are in the realm of basketball. That's
Yeah.
a school of choice. People are making the decision to move to towns like that. And so there is a socioeconomic
Yeah.
divide as well that has to be factored in. And so I think in the end, I think in the end, it probably works out, the way it's supposed to work out.
Yeah, and Brian, one that's close to us, Ansonia, they dominate football, right? And
Right.
people say the same thing, but one thing that I will just and I'll we could probably debate this for a long. We
Yeah.
could talk
Yeah.
about it, not debate it, but talk about this. I think I mentioned this to you, like everybody has the same time and like what you do with that time and to your point like there are public schools that clearly have they have their feeder system, they've got the right coach in place or the right system in place to develop kids, right? So I am also a big like, yeah, I get it, like people say well schools of choice have a little bit of advantage, yeah they may, But again, you have the same 6 hours or 3 hours in your practice to spend with those kids as the public school does as well, right? And so when it comes to, I'm a big time, like what you do with your time is really what makes the difference.
Yeah.
And those programs, I mean, I think it just maybe, and this is again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I've seen it where like every kid's a travel kid and every kid plays AAU, and that deserves that kid, needs to play at the next level because mommy and daddy, put him in this AAU program. And, but is it the right fit? Is it the right program? Is it the right development? Are
Yeah.
the kids developing? And I think that's a question that we've got to ask ourselves. Like, is that public school developing those kids? Like, yeah, you may have a freshman that comes in, he's 6'9" or 6'6", and he's like a ridiculous athlete. But if he's the same athlete that he was when he came in freshman year, when he was a senior, someone failed along those lines, right? Like he just
Yeah.
didn't develop. Can't make free throws, still turns the ball over. Like that's a developmental issue. So is that the school that was able to develop their athletes' fault? No. Right. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it. Like, I
Yeah.
think part of this discussion too is like it's got to go back on these programs. Like, you got to be able to develop kids because, again, and now with the new rule, like you can work with kids in the off season. So I can't tell you how many people I've talked to this year where I was like, and I asked the question, like, hey, what was your coach in every system, school choice or public? Like, what was the coach doing with the kids? Like, what was he doing with that extra time? Was it development, or was he just using that to coach them in their summer league? Or was he in the gym actually working, with the kids, or what are the kids doing in the off season? Like, what does the coach have them doing? Is he lifting? Is he doing like, again, we all have the same time. It's just a matter of what we do with it.
Yeah. 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 Look, I think that's fair. You know, I don't judge other coaches any more than I would want other coaches to judge me.
Yeah.
What I would say though, that the biggest differential, and this goes across the board, is I think we've been blessed, at Notre Dame to have basketball players, not just guys who play basketball,
Yeah.
right? And I would say if you held a gun to the head of Ansonia or New Canaan or Darien or Greenwich, they would say we have kids that play football. We don't just that are football players. We don't just have kids that play football. On the basketball side of some of those places, they have guys that play basketball but aren't necessarily basketball players, which is it's fine. But that's going to be the biggest differential, and so, the age of specialization, we can all lament it because it was a great experience growing up playing three sports. Like that was my joy. And we'd play 14 basketball games and then, and then baseball season would start, and for the guys that really cared, they'd have a ball in their hands, even though they're playing baseball. But,
Yeah.
but, those days are to a large degree over, and we have to accept that fact. And I'm happy that I get to work with kids that are basketball players that really have a passion for the game and have great ambition around it and are willing to dive through walls for to achieve their goals. And that's, we have that, and other schools have that as well. And that's going to be the biggest differential.
Yeah. So that was one of my questions here. If there's eighth graders watching this, what advice would you give them that want to play basketball in high school? Like what would be some of the things to give that young eighth grader looking to play at that next level in high school?
It's threefold, and I bet it's the same threefold that it takes to be LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, right? I mean, you have to, the ingredients are pretty, you know, you can't go wrong if you have good ingredients, right? And the ingredients are always, how is your skill, right? How is your skill level? What is your basketball IQ? And how hard do you work? Right? Those are the three things. And so, LeBron James is physical freak. Kobe Bryant was a physical freak, but there are other physical freaks that didn't become LeBron James or Kobe Bryant because they either didn't have the basketball understanding or didn't have the drive. And so, I would say for an eighth grader, it's really important. AAU is great because it puts you in, in big games, but it's not the be all and end all. If you have 4 hours to spend, it's much more important to spend 4 hours, honing your skills, because the higher level skill you have, the better player you're actually going to be. And then you have to watch games. When I was a kid, and it was really, I would go to games with my dad, a lot, and watch a lot of games with my dad. And I watched some of the greatest players in New York City basketball history, live, because I'd go to PSAL games, in the city. And my dad would say, all right, for the next 5 minutes, don't watch the ball. Watch everything but the ball, and that would teach you the movement of the game. I read a book about Wayne Gretzky. It's an amazing story. His dad says, Wayne Gretzky, a great hockey player, obviously one of the best of all time. His dad says he didn't have to. Wayne would watch Friday night hockey. So Friday night hockey was a big thing in Canada. He would watch it with a notebook, a blank notebook, and he would literally, and he didn't even realize he did it at first, but he'd have his pen on the page, and he would trace where the puck was going over the course of the game. And he would just trace where the puck is going. Because when you watch that, basketball is an easy game. It's pattern recognition. You just have to have seen the patterns to recognize quickly how this play will play out. What's likely to happen here? And so kids have to watch. It's not just about the highlights. It's about watching the game. That's the most important thing. And last thing, and I say this to our teams all the time, I say, be great at being good. Don't worry about being good at being great. Because if you're great at being good, then you've got the foundation. And then it's just about your physical gifts and things like that you add on top of that. If you're only good at being great, that means there's a lot of times where, you're going for greatness, but you're really not doing the fundamental things that you need to do.
I love it. I love it. And you've got to be, I have a saying, you've got to be really, 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 really good, almost perfect before you can be great.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Um, Shift gears here. Last question here. This year with Project Purple Sports, you guys did the awareness game with Colby, which was just so awesome. It was our think second game, because I think we did a game before that just to get comfortable with the players. Um, and Project Purple Sports has always been about raising awareness for our mission, and also helping support student athletes, because I think that's important, and to also teach them how there's things bigger than just basketball. I know we talked about the education piece, but there's other people in certain situations that maybe don't have all the things that one of them being health, right? And I know cancer's touched your family quite a bit. Talk to me a little bit about what that's been like, this year, that game. I mean, you guys, we went into that game with a lot of hype. It was like we didn't know if, and Colby, they played really hard. You guys came out victorious. But that's always, I mean, I go back even to when I was at Notre Dame, that was the biggest game of the season, right? And we used to play them twice, if I remember correctly. Now you guys only play once in the regular season. So that was a huge game, but it was awesome. Sold out at UB, lots of purple. But what was it like for you, to be involved in that special awareness game with us?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, obviously, and as I said from the beginning, I mean, the support you guys have provided, um, for the cause. Obviously, we're a secondary beneficiary of your work. The primary beneficiary is the cause itself. And as you said, cancer has touched my family's life. My wife is a breast cancer survivor, is deeply involved in a breast cancer awareness program. A very close friend of mine, his son had brain cancer, and so was involved in pediatric brain, tumors, and brain cancer. My father was passed away of what's called the glioblastoma, or brain tumor, and so it's really, it's hard to imagine that cancer hasn't touched everybody's life in some way, and so to be part of that game was meaningful. It's always the basketball side, obviously to be on the court with Colby is always a privilege. Uh, John Fall's a terrific coach and, for a long, long time and an elder spokesman in our league in a lot of ways. And he always has his teams prepared and playing hard. And so that's a great honor for us. And to before the game take pictures and have special uniforms for this game and things like that. It was it was poignant is the best way I could put it. And one of the things that we did when we went to Florida and opened our season, as I say to the kids all the time, this is a business trip. We want to have fun, but it's a business trip. But one of the orders of business was we went to the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital as a team and spent time with the kids there for half a day, um, because because everybody's going through something, and I think it's really important for young people to understand that there are always people that are better off than you, and there are always people that are worse off than you, and it's incumbent upon all of us to try to lift those that are worse off than us, and to be part of this organization which deals with pancreatic cancer and that does so much good and spreads light in a world that can sometimes be dark in some circles. I think that's why we do it. That's why we do it.
It's uh it's really inspiring, Coach K, because I'll tell you a quick story. At the Notre Dame West Haven game, I had a parent come up to me and mention that they've been impacted by the disease from the Notre Dame community that I was not aware, and wanted to learn more about what we're doing with the screening and surveillance here in Connecticut. So, like I always say, you just never know. And to your point, everybody's impacted by it, and so to have both communities, and in particular for me as a Notre Dame alum, is just really, really special. So I want to thank you for your time. I look forward to next season, hopefully continuing
Yeah.
this and continue to see you guys grow. If you have not seen Notre Dame Prep play, you can watch all the games that we live stream. They're on our YouTube channel. But definitely make a point because you guys are going to be really, really fun to watch next year. And thank you for the time.
No, appreciate you very much.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Coach K.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.